Hey folks, Quill18 here, and I'm really happy that so many people have gotten into trying DDO since putting up the video. I think it's a fantastic game. I love that it's free, and we've got a guild going on right now. Again, we're on the Thelanis server, or Thelanis, or I have no idea. And the guild is called the 8 and 10. And I think we've got maybe 20-25 members at this point, frankly. My main character is Thicket, Thikut. That's the person you can whisper for an invite, but actually anyone who's in the guild should be able to invite new members, so feel free. The more the merrier. The purpose of this video is to show you character creation, because the character creation process in DDO is fairly different from a lot of MMOs, in that most MMOs you just choose like a racing class and go. But here you actually have quite a few options in the build to shape your character, and it also, understanding how the characters work in DDO will help tell you how to level things up, because we're getting a lot of questions for that in the guild, especially if you haven't played tabletop Dungeons and Dragons before, because the system is very, very close to that. So I'm going to go through creating a new character and explaining the purpose of a lot of the different features. So there's not going to be any gameplay in this video, it's all going to be character creation. Alright, so we're going to create, and we're going to make someone new. Alright, so first thing it gives you is a choice of classification for your character. This doesn't do anything by itself, it'll simply show you different classes that you can play based on this. So if we go with melee and then we hit next, then it shows us all the melee classes. Fighter, Barbarian, Paladin. Monk is locked unless you unlock it by playing a bunch and getting favor, or by paying for it. And then spells, so we get spellcasters, and so on and so forth. I'm very quickly going to give a overview of the different classes. So, fighters in DDO. Alright, fighters can wear all the armor. They can wear from light armor to heavy armor, and there is actually a purpose in-game. Even though you can wear the heaviest armor, sometimes you might want to wear light armor, because there's something on armor called the maximum dexterity bonus. Maybe I'll explain that a little bit more later. But basically, if you're playing a very agile, very dexterous character, to take advantage of some of that, you're actually going to want to wear lighter armor, even if you can wear heavier armor. But if you're going with like a big strength-based kind of dude, then the heavier the better. So a fighter can wear all armor, use all martial weapons. In D&D, the weapons are divided into simple, martial, and exotic. Basically, everyone can use all simple weapons. Only certain classes can use martial weapons. Martial weapons just tend to be a little bit better, just do a little bit more damage. For example, a simple weapon would be a short sword, which does 1 to 6 damage per hit. A martial weapon would be a long sword, which does 1 to 8 damage per hit. Just as an example. There's a few other things too. Martial weapons, even if they do like the same damage as a simple one, maybe they get better crits, all kinds of things like that. A fighter can also use all types of shields, and there's quite a variety of shields. There's bucklers, which are very small shields, large shields, and then tower shields, which are enormous. Tower shields actually give you a slight penalty to hit while you're wielding them, but they give you the best armor class in the game. So if you're tanking, you throw on a tower shield, and if you're not tanking, but you're still a sword and shield guy, maybe you'll switch to using just a large shield or something like that. So that's the fighter thing. Also, fighters get a ton of bonus feats. A feat is a special ability you can pick up. There's a large list of them, and everyone gets access to them and can have a few on their character, and it really lets you customize your character in interesting ways, and fighters just get a ton of them. They don't get a lot of built-in abilities. Instead, they get the ability to really customize themselves with lots of feats. Barbarian. Barbarian is a more wild cousin of the fighter. Only gets access to lighter armors, and I don't think they get shields, or at least they don't get tower shields, but in exchange they get the ability to move faster, they get the ability to rage, which greatly increases their damage, and they get some built-in damage resistance, a few things like that. Barbarians are not as tanky, although you can still kind of tank, especially in the easier dungeons. You can off-tank and do things like that. But they're really, really good damage dealers. Now, for all of these classes, you can read the description here. You can go to more info, which describes you a little bit more. You can also get the stats. And what this does is give you a little bit of a highlight of which stats are the most important. This is an example build for where you might want to put your points. We'll get to that later. You don't have to understand what this means quite yet. And then it tells you strength is the most important stat for barbarians, because usually people with barbarians might go with like big two-handed swords. and so strength is pretty important. On the other hand, because you're not wearing heavy armor, your dexterity is going to help your armor class a lot, so that's important. And constitution is always amazing. Constitution gives you more hit points. Every character wants as much constitution as you can afford. Next up, Paladin, a holy warrior, can wear heavy armor, shields, not tower shields. I believe fighters are the only class that can use tower shields naturally, although you can spend a feat to gain the ability to use it. They also get some special abilities to smite evil, which is very, very cool. They are very tanky. They're not quite as damage dealery as, say, a fighter. A fighter, while he's a tank, you can build a fighter to be a little bit more damage dealing than Paladin, although you can certainly do that with a Pally as well. But the Pally's got some great defensive abilities. They also have an aura around them that gives everyone in your party extra armor and extra resistance to magic. Really nice support. They get the Lay on Hands ability, which allows them to heal a fair amount of hit points, like instantaneously. Very, very, very effective spell. Or actually, that's an ability. And they also get spell casting later on. They get some lightweight divine spell casting, so they can do some heals and buffs. A monk, I really don't know much about in this game. Although they get a unique resource in this game called Ki. They got a lot of abilities like Stunning Fist, the ability to deflect arrows. They don't wear armor at all. And they just do, punching and kicking. There are monk weapons you can use, like commas and things, or you can just use hand wraps and just be using that to punch people. But this is a class that you have to unlock, so that's going to be a more advanced thing anyway, so we don't really have to look at it. Looking at the spellcasters, I'm actually going to start with the wizard. The wizard is your standard The wizard is your standard spellcaster. The interesting thing about the wizards in D&D is they have a spell book where they put all the spells they know in there. And wizards can actually learn every single spell in the game. They can add it to their spell book. But you can only have a certain number of them memorized at once. So, at first level, I think a wizard starts with, depending on intellect, I think they might start with like 7 or 8 spells, for example. But you can only choose 3 to have memorized. And you use those 3 just on a particular adventure. Now, when you rest, which can happen at rest shrines or between adventures, then you can change your memorization. So, if you're finding yourself fighting a certain type of enemy or needing a certain type of buff, then you can swap that out. So wizards have a lot of versatility, and they have a mana bar, and every time they cast a spell, the mana goes down somewhat. A sorcerer is very similar to a wizard. They're both what are called arcane spellcasters. They both have exactly the same spell list. But whereas a sorcerer is intelligence-based and has learned his magic through study, and that's why he uses a spellbook, a sorcerer has the magic innate within themselves. In the D&D lore, a lot of sorcerers believe they actually have a little bit of dragon blood, and that's where their magic comes from. So instead of having a spellbook, they know the spells sort of innately, but they know very few spells. However, they can cast them a lot more. They have a much bigger mana pool, is I believe the way it works in DDO. And so they can spam the same spells much, much, much more often, but they're locked into their selection. Now, you can change the spell selection from time to time, but it's much more limited. You're not as flexible. They are much better damage dealers usually because they can spam out their spells a lot more. But you have to be really good at making very careful selections as to what your spells are. Both wizards and clerics just wear robes, very lightly armored, don't tend to do a lot of damage dealing. Next we have the cleric. The clerics in Dungeons and Dragons, some clerics of course are priests, they're religious figures, but in Dungeons and Dragons they are not cloth wearers. They can wear every armor in the game, and you can totally go around in full plate if you want. In fact, that's what my cleric does. Apparently at the very high levels, since as a cleric you're probably not going to be stacking your actual armor class enough to make a difference, then it becomes less important what the physical armor is and becomes more about buffs. If you find like leather armor that's got a really cool ability on it, you might just use that even though you can wear full plate. But early on the ability to wear heavy armor is really good. They can smash things fairly competently with their simple weapons. They can use a shield. So they can actually be kind of tanky. They can do a fair deal of damage, especially if they are using buffs. And they're very, very nice solo class. They're probably the best solo class in the game, I think. They are full spellcasters. They're very much like wizards. They don't have a spell book. Instead, clerics know every single divine spell in the game all the time. I mean, based on their level. So things have to unlock as you level up. But you can only memorize a handful of them. So it's the same thing. You want to prepare for your quest, so you're going to want, well, you automatically have a heal spell, and then you might grab some buffs, or there's a few spells you can use to deal damage, especially to undead. They're a very, very fun, very good class, and everyone always needs a healer, and so that's great, and you can go with a very melee-oriented cleric build as well if you want. Or if you went with something like an elven cleric, you could actually do a ranged cleric build, which is very interesting. The favored soul, again, is you have to unlock it, but a favored soul is basically like a cleric sorcerer. They get fewer spells known, but they can cast them more, and there may be some other tweaks involved as well. Finally, the specialist group. Rangers. Rangers are sort of foresty, themed, light combatants. They're very interesting in that when they level up, they get two sort of branches that they go. You sort of have to pick one, but not really. They are both excellent archers and also amazing dual weapon fighters. You can see she's got 2 weapons equipped, and the reason is that there is a feat in the game called 2-weapon fighting, and then later improved 2-weapon fighting, and so on and so forth. Well, Rangers get that automatically. So as a fighter, you could spend your bonus feats on it, but you have to meet certain prerequisites. As a Ranger, you would get that automatically, even if you don't meet the normal prerequisites. You also get a bunch of feats that improve your ranged attacks, so with bows, crossbows, that sort of thing. They're very cool. There's a few different ways to build them. You can be like a stealthy scout if you want. You can be really good at finding secret doors. But mostly you're going in for the combat usually. And that being said, if you want to be the good scout and sneaky type guy and detect secret doors, your best bet is actually go with a rogue. Rangers also, once they hit level 4, I believe, they actually gain the ability to cast some spells as well, some divine spells, cleric spells. So a little bit of an ability to heal and buff. And so they make some very interesting characters. The rogue is the master specialist, really. They get more skill points than anyone else, and so they can max out their ability to detect traps, detect secret doors, disarm traps, unlock doors, all the stealth skills, that sort of thing. They also get the use magic device skill natively that they can level up, which means that things like scrolls and wands are usually only usable by the appropriate spellcasters, either wizards and sorcerers or clerics and favored souls and paladins. But with the use magic device skill, you can sort of fake being that class and gain, and so you can carry around some wands of cure light wounds, so that when you're out soloing, you can heal yourself. Or scrolls of resurrection, so when the cleric dies, you can resurrect them. Little things like that. Now, that skill is available basically to everyone, but it's really, really accessible to a rogue because you both have a lot of skill points, and it's also something called a class skill, which we'll talk about later on. Next, we get the bard. The bard is a very jack-of-all-trades character. They're very interesting. You can use a bard very similarly to a rogue, but they also have spellcasting. They're also arcane spellcasters, although not as much as a wizard. They also get song abilities that they can use to buff their entire party, which are actually really good. And they can actually be half-decent fighters as well. Very, very jack-of-all-trades. Master of none. But really interesting. I don't know. I don't have much experience with rogues, so I'm not 100% sure about their role and how they fit. But I think they can do very, very well, actually. So those are all the classes. I think what I'm going to do is actually show you how to put together a rogue, simply because they're going to have a lot of really interesting options that'll just allow me to showcase a few different areas of the game. So I'm going to hit next. Next, you're offered a path, and if you are totally new to this sort of thing, it's not a bad idea to pick one of the paths. Each class will have 3 different types. So here they have the Dark Blade, which are stealthy assassin types, the Master Mechanics, which are experts at opening doors and lockpicking, and then the Thief Acrobat, which are really interesting because these lively rogues or skilled combatants are extremely difficult to pin down in battle. They're unequal in their ability to avoid damage from enemies. Also, I believe they're more strength-based than dexterity-based. And I know that some of them use like quarterstaffs and stuff instead of paired daggers. It's really, really interesting. You can also go customized, which is what I'm going to be showing you in this particular demo. They do say it's recommended for advanced players only because there are going to be a lot of options, and if you're not familiar with D&D, it might be a little bit confusing to you, but we're going to see if we can show you how it's done here. And it does give you the ability to come out with someone who's really quite unique. Next, now we have to pick our race, and there's quite a few. The first 4 here are unlocked for everyone: human, elf, elf, halfling, dwarf. I can't remember, the half-elf may also be unlocked, but I'm not sure. No, probably not. And then there are some races that you have to unlock with favor points, which you earn in-game, or turbine points, which you can pay for, or also semi-earn in-game. The Warforged, the half-elf, the drow, and the half-orc. All the races are quite good, but they each have certain benefits and certain drawbacks. And so depending on what class you're using and what playstyle you're going for, you may want one over another. I will tell you right out that human, no matter what role you're playing, no matter what your class is, humans are always good. And the reason is that humans are very versatile and just give you an sort of more customization options than normal. So you can always pick the human and then use the human customization options to pick stuff that makes you better at whatever you want to do. Basically, humans get slightly more skill points, and they get a free feat, which again we will talk about later. And they don't have any penalties. They don't have any penalties to anything, but they lack some of the focused bonuses. For example, an elf, among other things, where can you go? Here the more info. Elves start with higher dexterity, so they are more agile, they're better at range attacks, they get slightly more built-in armor from just being able to dodge quicker, basically. And that will also result in bonuses to certain skills. However, they have a lower constitution, so they will generally have fewer hit points. The lower constitution really hurts, actually. They also have a variety of other benefits. They're resistant to enchantment spells, they have better senses to spot hidden traps and doors, maybe some other stuff that's not listed here. Here are feats they get for free. So, for one thing, for example, elves always know how to use a longsword. It doesn't matter what class they are. So, for example, sorry, I gotta move my mic a sec here. For example, a rogue does not normally know how to use a longsword, but if you're an elven rogue, then you can, and that's very good. Rapier, longbow, and shortbow, they're immune to sleep effects. They have a bonus against enchantment spells. They get keen senses, which increases their listen, search, and spot checks, which is very nice. And apparently they're immune to sleep again. That's kind of odd. Next up, halfling. And I guess I should talk about what sort of classes they might be good for. Elves can make very good rogues. They make very good ranged characters. And that's really their forte. Halflings are quite short. They start with higher dexterity, much like elves, but a penalty to strength, which, while it can hurt your melee damage, is actually not as bad as a penalty to constitution, which is actually quite nice. Now, as a halflings do very well as anyone who uses a lot of dexterity, such as a rogue, and also they can actually make fairly good spellcasters, since spellcasters really don't care about strength too much, and you can definitely go into some builds that use your dexterity. They also get, they get bonuses to saves against fear. They get +1 bonuses to all saves. That is basically a save, or a saving throw is what happens when people cast certain spells at you. This is what you use to resist that. There are also other effects that aren't spells that rely on saving throws, so that's quite good. They get bonuses to jump and move silently. They get bonuses to listen check. They are small, which actually, because relative to them, everyone else is bigger, therefore everyone else is easier to hit, so they actually get a +1 bonus to hit. And also to their armor class, because they're so small, they're harder to hit. So that's fantastic. And they also get a bonus to hide checks. They make excellent rogues, but they also make great spellcasters. They're also very good at throwing weapons. They get a bonus to attack rolls with thrown weapons. So darts, throwing knives, shurikens, that sort of thing. Very, very, very awesome. Yeah, all kinds of different weapons. So, yeah, halflings. Dwarves. Dwarves are quite resilient and tough. They get a penalty to charisma, but they get a bonus to constitution. So dwarves will generally have more hit points than everyone else. Because they have a bonus to constitution, and constitution is very nice, dwarves make very good characters of any class in the game other than people who specifically need a high charisma, which is basically just sorcerers and favored souls, perhaps? I'm not sure. So a dwarven sorcerer would be a bad idea, but everyone else works out really well. It hurts a little bit as a cleric because your charisma does help with your turn undead attempts, but if you are playing like a melee sorcerer, it's quite nice to have the extra hit points. Or, not sorcerer, cleric. Yeah, so they also get a bonus resistance to their balance skills, so they're much harder to trip. They get some bonuses against certain races like giants and orcs. They're very resistant to poisons. They have an easier time on their search checks, which helps them to find secret doors and traps and things. And they get a bonus to their saving throws, a +2 bonus to saves against spell effects because they're magic resistant, which is really good. Dwarves are an excellent race. I don't know if they're very popular because they don't appeal to a lot of people. I don't think dwarven females are very popular, but my cleric is a dwarven male. Very cool. I'm not going to talk about the premium races too much, but the Warforged are robotic. They're very cool. Half-elves are a mix of human and elven, and they're really interesting. They're very close to human in that they don't really have a penalty to anything. And they have some interesting flexibility options. The Drow are white-haired, dark-skinned elves. Generally, their race is subterranean and normally quite evil, but of course, there are always exceptions, and player characters tend to be exceptions to that. You can unlock this in-game with favor points, and they're a very, very strong race, actually. And then the half-orcs. Speaking of strong races, the half-orcs, wow, the females look odd, are literally very, very strong. They have a significant bonus to strength, but they get a penalty to both intelligence and charisma. So you don't tend to see half-orc wizards or sorcerers, for example. But they make very good everything else. Obviously, you're probably going to want to capitalize on their strength and make a melee-oriented character. But anything that uses that is going to be pretty good. Yeah, but again, they're a premium race that you sort of have to unlock. So I am... I'm going to use human just to show you how to maximize the options that humans get, just to show you the variety here. Next. Alright, the next screen, I believe, is one you're only going to see if you're customizing... Why is this going so slow? For some reason, this game goes really slow when I'm running Camtasia, and nothing else. Wow. Okay, yeah, that's really odd. It's fine if I'm frapsing it, it's fine if I'm just playing it, but there's something funny going on there. Okay, this screen you will only get if you are customizing your character. This is where you can assign your abilities. Now, I'm going to go down and tell you, well, they're described here. Strength affects melee attack chance, so how easy you can hit in melee, and also your melee damage. Your dexterity improves your armor class, your reflex saving throws, so these are spells or effects that rely on you dodging. Okay, you're going to be able to dodge them easier. And also your ranged attack chance. So with a high dexterity, you can hit easier with ranged attacks. With the strength, you hit easier with melee attacks, and also improves your damage on melee attacks. Rangers get a bonus, a special ability where they can add their strength damage to their ranged attacks as well. There's also a feat you can get called Weapon Finesse that allows you to use your dexterity for your melee attack chance instead of your strength. So if you're playing a very high dexterity, low strength rogue, you get Weapon Finesse, and then you'll be able to hit very easily in melee, despite the fact that you have no strength. Although you won't be adding a lot of damage because your strength will be poor. But if you're playing something like a rogue, you're going to be adding damage from another source. Constitution affects hit points and fortitude saves, so things like poison. Hit points are very important. Generally, you want to get your Constitution as high as you can work it and still fit into your build. Intelligence gives you more skill points, which is very nice for a lot of people, and improves your spell casting for wizard. I would tell you right off, if you're playing a spellcaster, generally speaking, you want to maximize the attribute assigned to your spell casting, because A, it will give you more mana. B, it may give you more spell knowledge. I'm not sure. This is some of this stuff comes from tabletop D&D versus DDO. But also, it will make your spells harder to resist, so it makes them very, very, very highly more effective. You also need a basic amount of stat in this to be able to cast spells up to a certain level. So, for example, for a wizard to be able to eventually cast the highest level spells, you ultimately need an intelligence of 19. Now, you actually can't start that high, but there's a lot of ways to boost these in-game, so that's okay. But maximizing your spell casting ability is pretty key. Wisdom affects your will saves, so affects things like any mental effects that are trying to affect you. You shrug off with Wisdom. And it improves spellcasting ability for clerics, paladins, and rangers. Also, the offensive spell power for favored souls. I believe how hard your spells are to resist as a favored soul is determined by your Wisdom. The favored souls are odd because their spellcasting is sort of split across Wisdom and Charisma. Intelligence is usually, you can often just dump intelligence, as in not put any points into it for most people, except wizards, and unless you want more skill points. Wisdom is a dump class for basically anyone other than spellcasters who use Wisdom. Although, again, having a few more points will help your will saves. There are also skills assigned or related to each one of these skills, or each one of these attributes. For example, Spot and Listen are tied to Wisdom, so the better your Wisdom, the better that will be. But it's not usually a priority that people place. Usually Wisdom is only really pumped a lot by things like Clerics, Paladins, and maybe Rangers. Charisma affects your spellcasting if you are a Sorcerer, a Bard, and a Favored Soul. Again, the Favored Soul, this will affect, I believe, how much mana you have, because the Wisdom is how easy or hard your spells are to resist. It also improves your turn undead ability for clerics and paladins, which is quite nice. Paladins also get a bonus. They get all their saving throws are improved based on their charisma bonus. So there are two parts to reading the numbers here, or three parts, I suppose, in a sense. This area here, where it starts you off at 8, that's your actual score in the ability. For example, as a rogue, we're going to want good dexterity, so I'm going to put some points into dexterity. So I brought it up from an 8 to, say, a 16. Alright, that's my score, but this score isn't used by anything directly. Instead, it's the ability modifier that matters, and you can see at 8 it starts at a -1. At 9 it's still a -1. At 10 it goes up to 0. 11, no change. 12, a +1. It's at every even number the ability modifier goes up by 1. And this is the number that gets used by stuff. This +3 dexterity means my armor class will be improved by 3. My reflex saves will be improved by 3. Any skill that uses dexterity, such as opening locks, will be improved by 3. So generally speaking, you want these to be even, although there's certainly some times where it might make sense in here to set it to be odd, because you can get items in game that give you +1 to a stat. In which case, if this was set to a 15 and I got the +1 item, then I would end up at 16 and I'd be good to go. Now, one important factor of Dungeons & Dragons is that, and this is a carryover from tabletop, is virtually every check that's made, every attack roll, every saving throw, is made by rolling a 20-sided die. Okay, so a number from 1 to 20 is generated, and then you add stuff to it. So that means a +1 modifier effectively is 5% better. So if I have an enemy with an armor class of, say, 15, alright, I would roll a 20-sided die and I need for my attack, and I need to come out with a 15 or higher to hit him. Well, if I'm using my dexterity to hit, so that's a +3, which means now really I only need a 12 or higher on my roll. So 12 plus 3 would hit. And then if I pile on to the fact that as you level up, you get extra bonuses to hit, maybe you have a magic weapon, maybe you have feats that give you a bonus to hit, all these things add up and make it easier and easier and easier for you to hit people. Same with strengths would be added damage. If I'm using a longsword, I'm only doing 1 to 8 points of damage, but if I have a +2 strength modifier, then I'd add 2 extra damage to that. So I'd, in fact, effectively be doing 3 to 10 points of damage per hit. And so it adds up quickly. Constitution gives you more hit points per level, basically. Things like that. So they add up, and this is the number that really matters, even though you're setting these guys. So, for a rogue build, we definitely want a lot of dexterity. Oh, the other thing I need to mention, the point cost. So let me get back down to 0. Or to 8, rather. You can see I have 28 points to spend. You can later, by playing a whole bunch, you can actually unlock a 32-point build later on, which is quite nice. So the point cost for dexterity right now is 1. To go up a stat, it's going to cost me 1 point. In fact, that's what happens. The points down here go down to 27. Now my dexterity's gone up by 1. It keeps going 1-to-1 cost all the way. 12, 13, 14. Okay, so going from 13 to 14, so 13 is going to cost me 1 point. That's indeed what happened. To go up from 14, it's going to cost me 2 points. You can see I'm at 22 points. If I go up to 15, I'm down to 20. It costs me 2 points to do that. Same thing for 16. Then it goes to 3 points to go to 17. Same to 18. And now I am maxed out. I can't go any higher. But those last few points really, really cost me a lot. So for example, to go from 8 to 14, it cost me 6 points in total. But to go from 8 to 16, it's cost me 10 points in total. And to go all the way up to 18, it's cost me 16 points. So that extra plus 2 cost me an extra 10 stat points that I don't have everywhere else. Yeah, so it hurts to max out a stat. Like, obviously, like, dexterity is so important as a rogue, but it hurts to go all the way up. So a lot of people, if it's their primary stat, might stop at 16 because it gets a lot more expensive. The difference is something like a sorcerer or wizard will almost always go all the way up to 18 in their intelligence or charisma because they don't really need a whole lot of these other stats. So they are fine with dumping it all the way in. As a cleric, you have a hard choice to make because if you want to be like my guy is a battle cleric is what I call him. He's fairly good at melee, so I wanted a good amount of strength as well. So I couldn't put my wisdom all the way up to 18, even though it would have been nice, because I needed more points for other things. So I went up to 16. I'll show you exactly what I kind of looked like here. I went up to 16 in my wisdom, which gave me enough points to also go up to 16 in my strength, which gave me some points left over so I could put some points in the constitution. And then, I don't remember, I think maybe some charisma or something like that. I don't recall exactly. But if I was playing a straight-up sort of caster-oriented cleric, then I would have gone all the way up to 18 in my wisdom. I still would have put a bunch of points into my constitution because I want hit points, and then I would have put it maybe just in charisma. Ignore strength altogether. I'm going to say, oh, well, if I'm going to suck at melee, I'm not going to bother putting any points in strength altogether. I'm not really going to bother meleeing. I'm just going to be a pure spellcaster, and I'm going to go this way. Alright, so you sort of want to think of that a little bit, and that's part of the reason. Like I said, customizing characters are very complex. So let's say I'm going to put my dexterity up to 16 because I want to save some points for somewhere else in my rogue build. Next thing you definitely, every character, you probably want to think about constitution because hit points are so important. Virtually, the rule of thumb, really, is your constitution, you put it to 14. You put as many points as you can before it starts to get expensive. And you're good there. You're going to get a lot of extra hit points. It's going to be very valuable. Some people might go up to 16, but that's a lot of points. The exception is if you're building a tanky type character, a fighter or a paladin or something that's intending to be fairly tanky. You may want to put the extra points up to Constitution, go up to 16. Rarely will you want to go up any higher. And actually, I'm going to back up here. I'm going to show you what it looks like if you are playing a different race. So, for example, a dwarf, right, which is what my cleric is. Dwarves get +2 to Constitution and a -2 to Charisma. So you can see my Constitution is already 10. My Charisma is already 6, or down to 6. The thing is, those bonus points get applied after the base. So you'll be able to see my Constitution. I'll bring it up to 14, and notice the cost is still 1. I can bring my Constitution all the way up to 16 before it gets more expensive. Versus my Charisma here, I can bring it up to 12, and that's when it becomes 2. So it becomes more expensive right away, and in fact my maximum is now 16, and my maximum here, oops, ran out of points, my maximum here is 20. So, and the thing is, when I do tabletop D&D, I think of it differently. I assign all my points based on starting at 8, going to a maximum of 18, and then after everything's been assigned, then I add the +2 or -2 or whatever it is. But that tells you that. So when I'm playing a dwarven character, usually I'm just going to start with a Constitution of 16, because that gives me the most con I can for the most effective point cost. But I want to go back and use human again. So yeah, for our build, we're going to go Dex of 16, a Con of 14, and then there's a lot of questions here. Rogues can use a lot of skill points. Intelligence helps determine skill points, so I like to put a fair number of points in there personally when I'm doing a tabletop type thing. Probably the same thing for DDO. I'm going to do that. I might bring up my strength to at least 10, because right now I've got a -1 modifier, and that'll mean reducing my damage. Yeah, I'll bring it up to 10. Plus, I think encumbrance is sort of dealt with strength, so I want to be able to carry a lot of loot. So sure, we'll do that. And then I really don't know. I don't know. I'll bring up my intelligence here, and you know what? I'll bring up my wisdom for the spot and listen checks a little bit higher, plus the will saves. Yeah, okay, so I've kind of spread it around. Maybe it's not optimal. I don't know. Maybe I could have put my dex higher. You know, if I don't really care about my wisdom that much, I could go to a dex of 17. You know, there's an idea, something I could do, and then maybe put that up to 9. Because, again, these breakpoints suck, right? Going from an 8 to a 9 does nothing. Going from a 16 to a 17 does nothing. But if I find an item that gives me +1 dexterity, then I'm going to be happy. Also, every 4th level, you get to add +1 to a stat. So that's great. At level 4, I can add +1. Also, in DDO, the levels are divided into 5 ranks, so you kind of level up more often. So, for example, you start at level 1, rank 1, and then as you get XP, you'll go to rank 2, 3, 4, 5, and then when you hit rank 6, that's when you hit level 2. Well, depending on your race and class, so at every rank you get something called an enhancement, a very tiny boost to something. Depending on your race and class, some of those enhancements can give you +1 to a stat. So I can very easily get my dexterity up to 18. So that's not a bad idea here, even though it's kind of silly. And I might at some point want to add +1 to my wisdom somehow, just to break that even. I'm not sure entirely what I can get that would give me a +1 wisdom. I don't know if my race or class will give me that as an option, but what the hell, we'll find out. So let's leave the stats like this. It's pretty decent. You can see what I'd end up here, my hit points. If I bring down my constitution, you can see my hit points are lower. It's not making a ton of difference at level 1, because at level 1 you start with 20 hit points plus some extra hit points based on your class, so I get 6 of them as a rogue. As a fighter I would get 10, as a barbarian I would actually get 12. So as a rogue I get 6, so 20 plus 6 plus the 2 from my constitution. But when I level up, I would get a few more from being a rogue, and then I get the extra 2 from constitution. So these add up dramatically. By the time you're level 20, this will add 40 extra hit points to me, which is huge. So let's click next. Next screen. Again, this is skills, and again, this is something that only comes up if you're going the customization route. If you've chosen one of the pre-made paths, these will be assigned for you. But I want to explain how these work so that you understand how they work in-game. First of all, there's 2 types of skills. There are these skills with this octagon, this sort of stop sign around it. These are always on. They're passive skills. They just always apply. So balance, for example, is something that is used if you get knocked down by something. The better you balance, the faster you will stand back up. Alright? Anything with a swear is an active ability. You put these on your toolbar and then you use them when you want. So for example, bluff allows you to fake out an enemy, and then it will actually throw them off balance and make them vulnerable to attack, which you can hit them more easily, and also as a rogue you can sneak attack them. We'll talk about sneak attack a little bit later. Bluff's a cool ability as a rogue. The other thing you want to read on here is the key ability. Each skill in the game is tied to a certain attribute. And that will give you, when you're doing your skill check, again, this is a 20-sided roll plus modifiers. So your ability that's tied to it is going to be improving that. So I'm getting a +3 to my balance check simply because I have a high dexterity, whereas I'm getting a -1 to my bluff check because I have a terrible charisma. So those tie in. Ultimately, they don't make as much of a difference, though. These are not crippling, and you don't have to stress about these too much. Yes, it helps, but it's not the end of the world. Now, you can see here, I have a whole lot of skill points as a rogue. I have a whole lot of skill points. A, because I'm a rogue, and rogues get a lot, and B, because I put some points into my intelligence. However, if I was say, a fighter or a cleric, and I left my intelligence at 8, I might only have 4 skill points. That's as much of a difference you'll see. Like, this is really extreme. There's a huge range of skill points. Wizards tend to start with a lot of skill points as well, because they tend to have a high intelligence, even though their class, wizards as a class don't necessarily give you a lot of skill points, but you end up with a lot. Also, as a human, you start with 4 bonus skill points. So no matter who you are, if you're human, you're going to start with some more, which is very, very nice. When you level up, you get more skill points, again, based on your class, your intelligence, and also if you're human, you get an extra point when you level up. Now, I said there's 2 types of skills, the passive and active ones. There's another division in skills. There are class skills, which you can see here. I'm going to spend points, and it's going to go up on a 1-to-1 level. I spend 4 points in here. This says I have 4 ranks in the skill, and it's improved my modifier by 4. It went from 3 to 7. That's +4. But there are also cross-class skills, and as a rogue, I have to go way down to the bottom to find concentration and heal. These have little asterisks. These are cross-class skills. You can see I'm going to put a point into heal. I've spent a whole point, but it only improved my rank by a half. And a half doesn't do anything. So you have to spend 2 points in here just to get anything going on. So they cost twice as much. Also, you can see the plus sign is grayed out now, and as much as I click, it's not going to go up any higher. you can only be half as good in a cross-class skill, plus it costs you twice as much to be half as good, basically. So you have to really, there really has to be a point to a cross-class skill for you to want to invest points into it. And sometimes there are some skills that are worth doing. But that's going to be on a case-by-case basis and basically come down to your build and what you feel that you want. But you can see as a rogue, most skills are class skills for me, very cheap, very accessible, and I have tons of points. And more than anything, rogues are masters of skills. The key skills for a rogue, the most important ones, I'm going to tell you right now, this is the ones that people in a party are going to want you to have. Spot. Spot, what it will do is it will automatically alert you if you are near a hidden object, like a door, a trap, a hidden object. And enemies that are trying to hide, what they will do is instead of being completely invisible, they will show up as like a shadow, like a very translucent version of themselves, so that you can see, oh, there's someone over there who's hidden, except he's not hidden to me. So Spot will help you do all those things. So it's very important to alert you, mostly for traps, especially higher level dungeons. The traps can easily one-shot your entire party and kill you all. So being able to spot them is very important, and also to let you know if there's a secret door around. But this will just tell you, oh, I think there's something here. To actually specifically find it, you need the search skill. And you can see the spot is passive, the search is active. So when your spot alerts you that there's something around, then you hit your button for your search, your character will sort of look around, and then things may appear. The traps will be revealed, the control panel that you can use to disable the device will be revealed, or the section of the wall that is the secret door will glow, and then you can go and click on it and open the secret door. So this is a very important combo. Now, rogues are not the only people who can get this as a class skill, and everyone can get it as a cross-class skill if they want. For example, I believe rangers can get both of these as well, which is quite nice for spotting secret doors and also letting you know if there's a trap, but without the disable device skill, which is more or less rogue only, you can't disarm the trap. Anyone can open the secret door, but you need this to disarm the trap. So as a rogue, you're almost certainly going to want to keep this maxed out. Even if you're a melee rogue, you're not thinking, oh, I'm the trap disarmer, you are probably going to want these because they're very valuable. And the other one you're really going to want is open lock, because there are some locked doors throughout the dungeons. And I think there's some high-level dungeons that like tell you when you go into it, oh, you need a party, you need a full-size, well-balanced group for this. There may be doors that are required to be opened to proceed, but there are also many doors in many dungeons that simply are either a shortcut or lead to treasure or a new rest area. So in a very hard dungeon, it'll give you another place to regenerate your hit points and your mana. Or they may lead to a special optional boss, which you can kill for extra experience points, plus extra treasure. It's a very nice thing to have. Listen is okay as well. Listen will help you... well, actually, what I should do first is discuss the ways that you can be stealthy. So on every character's toolbar, they have a button to enter stealth mode. For most characters, this button is going to be useless, okay? Because they're going to have a terrible hide and a terrible move silently skill. As a rogue, you'll have a high dexterity, and it's a class skill, so you can put tons of points into it as well. Ranger and I think bards are example of other people with those things. So by putting a bunch of points in here, now when you enter stealth mode, people are going to have a hard time seeing you, unless the monsters happen to have a high spot check. So that's the relation, hide versus spot. Then there's also a move silently. So hide is great if you're just standing still, but people can also hear you while you're stealthed, unless you put a bunch of points into move silently. What will happen, monsters who can hear you but can't see you, they will start searching for you and may eventually find you. But if you put move silently, which is opposed by listen, and that's the relationship there, move silently versus listen, then they won't be able to hear you in the first place and you'll be able to get a total sneak attack. Whether you want listen or not, I don't know. It does help you spot things that are sneaking up before they get you, but in my opinion, I haven't found sneak or listen to be that valuable. Although, on the other hand, I suppose I haven't played enough to really experience monsters that sneak up to me and then backstab the shit out of me. But frankly, I think I'd just rather a higher spot to be able to just see them or something like that. I don't know. Although, move silently will help against people who actually have invisibility. There's a spell in the game called invisibility that will make you 100% invisible. So it doesn't matter how good your spot is, you probably won't see them, but you may still be able to hear them. So yeah, now we still have lots of points left over, so what are we going to do? I'm going to go through the rest of the skills just to tell you how they work. So balance lets you get up if you've fallen. Bluff throws people off guard. Diplomacy allows you... Now, there are some quests where you have to talk to NPCs and use these skills to do something special. I haven't found them to be required yet, but presumably they may give you access to a shortcut, make a dungeon go faster, maybe help you avoid a fight, or get you extra treasure. So those are good for conversations. Bluff, diplomacy, intimidates like that too. But in combat, diplomacy has a special ability, is it reduces the aggro. And aggro is a term that is used in most MMOs and also some other games. Basically, if aggro determines who an enemy is attacking. Right? So if you've hit an enemy very hard, you will make them mad. They will turn around and attack you. You can use diplomacy to reduce your aggro and basically encourage the monster to go attack someone else instead. Okay? Or you're not encouraging them to attack someone else specifically. You're just encouraging them not to attack you. And that may sound a little funny and weird, and why would you do that? But the reason is there's... and I'll explain Intimidate right now. Intimidate's the opposite. Intimidate is you are taunting people to attack you. So the dynamic in a group is the tanky person, the fighter, the paladin, maybe even the barbarian or even a battle cleric might take Intimidate and try to get encourage monsters to attack them, since they have a lot of hit points and maybe really good armor. Meanwhile, other people in the party who are squishier might use diplomacy to keep themselves alive. So ideally, everyone attacks the tank, the healers heal the tank, and the squishy people just deal damage and not worry about. In lower level dungeons, it hasn't really come up as being important yet, but I think it plays a bigger role as you level up. So something to keep in mind. Disable advice is to disarm traps. Haggle is really interesting. Haggle improves the price that you get from selling loot to NPCs. So all the loot you get in dungeons that you sell to NPCs, you will get better prices if you have a higher haggle. What some people do is they level up an alt character who has good charisma and a maxed out haggle skill, and then when they get loot, they mail the loot to the other character to sell. Interesting idea. Basically, for every point in here, you get a 0.5% better sale price, and that can really add up because there's some really expensive items in the game. Hide, I explained. Intimidate, I explained. Jump. Well, you jump higher, and there are numerous sort of jumping puzzles in the game. Some of which are just made easier by having a good jump check, but in some of the big, harder dungeons that need a good party, there are certain places where you have to send like one character, like your rogue, to jump to an area that is mostly inaccessible to the rest of the group, to hit a switch or something that'll open a gate for everyone else. So jump is a really good skill for that, actually. There are numerous ways in-game to buff your jump check. There are potions, there are spells. And I've heard it said that maybe you want to buff it up to maybe like 10 ranks, and then sort of leave it there, and just rely on the buffs like that. But clearly there's a benefit. There's a point to having a decent number of jump ranks in there. So, yeah. Now, you can put, at level 1, you can go up to 4 ranks in anything, but then when you level up, the max only goes up by 1. So at level 2, I'll have a max of 5. Level 3, a max of 6, and so on. So jump, if you're looking to put in about 10 ranks, the soonest you can max that out is at level 7. So, yeah, you may as well put some points in there. It's very nice. I explained move silently, or listen, move silently, open lock. Repair. Repair is very interesting. Repair and heal are very similar in a way. It does two things. One, okay, you have hit points in this game, and normally you think, oh, when I get to 0 hit points, I'm dead. In D&D, it works a little bit differently than that. Once you get to 0 hit points, or even negative hit points, you're actually just disabled, so you're unconscious, and bleeding to death. There's a point at which you will die. And I don't know what it is in DDO, actually. In Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, which is what this is based on, it's when you hit negative 10. When you're at negative 10 hit points, then you're dead. In 4th edition, they made it bigger, and I don't know what they did in DDO. So someone with a heal skill can use the heal skill to stabilize you, so that, A, you're no longer bleeding to death, and I think it'll also allow you to stand back up, although you'll be at like 1 hit point or something like that. The other thing it'll do is when you rest at a rest shrine, you don't get all your hit points back at a rest shrine. You get a certain amount back based on your level, I think. And if someone in the party has heal, basically the person in the party with the highest heal skill will give you additional hit points when you rest. So that's awfully nice. But arguably, it doesn't necessarily matter that much at the higher level, because the easiest way to get someone back who's bleeding to death is just to hit them with a heal spell. So hopefully you're running with a cleric, and so they get healed up, and you're okay. So it's a little bit questionable. Also, heal doesn't work on Warforged, and that's where repair comes in. Warforged are characters. They're one of the races available, but they're kind of robotic. They use the repair skill instead. Basically, repair is exactly like heal, except for Warforged. Search, I explained. Spot, I explained. Swim! There are underwater swimming sections, and swimming basically, this allows you to swim faster and also hold your breath for a longer period of time. Early on, I haven't seen it come up too much as a problem, although it's certainly very nice. The biggest problem is the fact that when you wear very heavy armor, it gives you a penalty to your swim check. So you swim slower and you can't hold your breath as much. So when I'm running around with my cleric and I've got to do a swimming section, it's like really dicey, and I've come very close to drowning several times. One of the ways you can solve that is literally by stripping down, taking off all your armor, and then doing the swimming. There's a lot of skills actually that are affected by something called armor check penalty, and the heavier your armor, the higher the armor check penalty, and it will tell you what that is when you look at the armor. So it'll hurt your move silently, your hide, your swim, your tumble, your jump. These are all hurt by armor. So sometimes when you get to a jumping section, you'll see people strip down to make it easier to do that. As a rogue, you will be using fairly lightweight armor that has a very low or non-existent armor check penalty, so you really don't have to worry about that at all. So yeah, swim. Tumble is very interesting. Tumble is a very cool skill. In-game, if you hold down the shift key, your character will enter a defensive stance. They'll hold their weapon and shield in front of them to block, and it will improve their armor class somewhat. But while you're doing that, you can't attack. Although, if you have a shield, you hit the attack button, what you will actually do is shield bash your opponent, which generally does less damage, but preserves some of your defenses. And you can improve that. There are feats you can take that make you keep more of your defenses and do more damage with the shield bash. So if you're playing a tanky character, that's an interesting route to take. But when you're in this defensive stance by holding shift, if you hit one of your arrow keys, what you will do normally is just do a little hop forward, back, to the side, that sort of thing. But if you have tumble, you will actually roll. And the advantage to having tumble is, first of all, if you don't have any skill in tumble, you can't even use it. You have to have at least one rank to be able to do it. Okay, and then the more the merrier. When you have the tumble skill, the more skill you have, so you will roll. The more skill you have, the faster and further you will roll, to the point where if you really put tons of points into it, you can actually move faster while tumbling than just running. It's kind of funny. You also get a significant bonus to your armor class, I believe, while tumbling. And you can use it to do things like dodge range attacks and just generally get out of a pack of enemies. I think you may be able to even go through enemies with it. So if you're surrounded and stuck, you can tumble through them and then get out of a block. Very interesting. Also, if you're fighting with a group of your friends, you can tumble through an enemy and then attack from the back. And if you're doing that, if you're attacking, if you have an ally on one side of an enemy and you're on the other, you're then flanking, and it'll actually give you +2 to hit. Which is really nice. And then finally, use magic device, which I explained earlier. Use magic device, you can only use if you're trained, allows you to attempt to use items that are only usable by certain classes or levels or alignments or something like that. And basically every time you try to use it, you do a roll. So you want this as high as possible to be consistent. When you mouse over an item, it'll tell you, like a wand, it'll tell you what the use magic device check is. So a wand might be a 20. It'll also tell you what classes don't need to do a use magic device check. For example, if it's an arcane wand, then wizards, bards, and sorcerers won't have to do a check for it, but everyone else would have to. So use magic device, if you want to use it, and it's actually very nice. If it's a class skill for you, you probably want to max it out. It would also help if you had a decent charisma, so here we're hurting a little bit. But there are also items you can get in-game that buff that out. So we're going to put points in there. We got a bunch of points left over, so we may as well put points into, say, listen, and haggle. So we can sell all the loot. Oops. All the loot we steal, we're going to be able to sell better. Great. Again, you don't have to do skill points if you choose a path. Now we come to feats. Feats are extraordinarily powerful. Everyone starts with 1 at level 1. You start with 1 feat. If you're human, you start with a bonus feat. If you are a fighter or a wizard, you also start with an extra bonus feat that comes from a limited list. So there are fighter bonus feats. So some of these feats are like, I don't know, they may even say it. I'm trying to think of something here. something that would be an example. Two-weapon fighting, or toughness. I believe these are feats that you can use as your fighter feat. You can't just choose anything, but you actually get a really good selection. Same with the wizard. The wizard ones will be related to spellcasting, but frankly, you're generally going to want those as a wizard anyway, so it makes perfect sense. So here we get one for free and one because we're humans, so we're going to do that. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can go. There's feats for every frackin' thing you can possibly imagine that you can benefit your character. There's a bunch of feats that improve skills. For example, acrobatics will give you +2 to jump and tumble checks. Alertness gives you spot and listen. All these are quite nice. They're also, way down here, skill focus feats, which are for a single skill, but give you +3. So it's more efficient to go with one of the ones that gives you +2 and +2 because you're netting 4. But this, first of all, they stack. So for example, we could get alertness, which gives us +2 to spot and listen, and then we could get skill focus spot. And then our spot skill would be through the roof. And there's a lot to be said. What's the rogue one? Is it Nimble Fingers? Bonus to disable device and open locks. Very, very nice. And you might want to combo that with the ability to search better, which I think they've got one. But there's other stuff. For example, as a rogue, we are normally only proficient in light armor. Well, we could get the medium armor proficiency. And if we do that, actually, then that will unlock the heavy armor proficiency. Now, all of a sudden, we're a rogue that can wear full plate. How did this happen? What other game can you like radically change your stuff this much? Well, there are probably others, frankly, but this is one of the things about D&D. Now, as a rogue, you probably don't want to wear heavy armor because that would give you these armor check penalties that would hurt some of the skills you rely on so much. But maybe you got something weird you're planning on. You're planning on doing a melee fighter rogue that sneak attacks and wears heavy armor. You can totally do that. You're totally allowed. And again, the octagon ones are always on. Die Hard's interesting. You automatically stabilize when incapacitated, so instead of bleeding to death, you don't. So that's good. And the square ones are active. So combat expertise, for example, will let you sacrifice your attack bonus, so you won't hit as easily, but instead it will improve your armor class. So this is a really interesting thing you can do if you're playing a character that might want to tank. You grab this, and then when you're tanking, when you've got aggro, you flick on combat expertise because you don't really care about doing that much damage. You just want to stay alive. Very, very nice ability. You can also take it as a spellcaster, but because you don't care about your hit bonuses. But unfortunately, it makes your spells twice as expensive to cast while you're in that mode, so it's not really worth it. Usually, it's a tanky one. There are also a bunch of feats that improve saving throws. Like Disciplined here gives you +1 to that and +2 to concentration check. Iron Will just give you a +2 to your will save, and I believe they would stack. So there's a lot of those. These Dragon Mark ones are really interesting. This is something specific to the Eberron world, and they take a long time to sort of explain the lore behind it. But it basically means that you are a part of a very prestigious bloodline. It also gives you a wicked cool tattoo-looking thing on your face, which you can turn off in your options if you don't like it, but it looks awesome. And depending on what race you have, different dragon marks will be available. So humans get quite a few, but what's interesting is the Mark of Finding, for example, is actually available to half-orcs as well. So these usually will give you like a bonus to a skill and then the ability to cast some spells. What's a good example? House Orion gives you +2 to your balance skill and lets you cast Expeditious Retreat, which gives you faster running. So there's a lot of these things. The Mark of Sentinel lets you cast Shield of Faith, which gives you a bonus to your armor class. Really nice. Plus, improves your Intimidate skill. Really nice if you're going to be playing a tank, because you want a good Intimidate to pull people in, and you would like the ability to improve your armor class if you're getting wailed on. As a rogue, I mentioned there's one feat that's really, really nice to get called Weapon Finesse. And if we go all the way down to the bottom, to the W's, there's no Weapon Finesse. And that's because every feat, well, not every feat, but a lot of feats have a prerequisite. For example, if we go over the two-weapon fighting here, you can see it requires a dexterity of 15. Well, Weapon Finesse requires a base attack bonus of +1. So as you level up in your class, you get a base attack bonus, which increases your chance to hit. And certain classes get one every level. For example, fighters and barbarians, rangers, I think, get +1 base attack every level. So at level 1, they've got a +1. By the time they get to level 20, they get a +20 to hit, just from leveling up. Rogues don't. They get one, they get what, 2 every 3? 3 every 4? I don't remember what they are. But basically, at level 1 they start with a +0 base attack bonus, and weapon finesse requires a +1, so you can't start with it. Which means, as a rogue, it kind of sucks because until you can get a second feat, until you level up and then get another feat, which normally happens at level 3, you're stuck using your strength bonus as your to-hit modifier. And that really kind of blows. You can speed it up, though, and I guess that's a good time to introduce it. Unlike MMOs like World of Warcraft, when you level up, you don't have to stay the same class. When I become a level 2 character, I don't have to go and pick Rogue as my next level. I don't have to automatically become a level 2 Rogue, although it's very common. I could instead go over to the fighter trainer and say, okay, I want to level a fighter now. And what that would mean, that would make me a level 1 Rogue, a level 1 fighter. Now, I'm a level 2 character, and they all stack together. So what you do is you get stuff from the fighter. Well, because I leveled up as a fighter, then as opposed to a rogue, then what I'm going to get is I'm going to get slightly more hit points than I would have. I get the +1 base attack bonus, but of course I would have gotten that going to a level 2 rogue anyway, so that's not necessarily better. However, at level 1, as a level 1 fighter, I get a bonus feat, which means now I can take weapon finesse. So now I get weapon finesse as a level 2 character instead of having to wait till level 3. On the other hand, fighters don't get as many feats. They also don't get the same selection of class, or not feats, my bad. They don't get as many skills. They also don't get the same selection of class skills. So your skill selection is gonna suffer for a level or two or whatever. They're also, rogues get certain innate bonuses that you would be delaying that way. So, there's back and forth. On the other hand, you would be unlocking a bunch of weapons. For example, rogues can't normally use longswords, but if you take a level of fighter, then all of a sudden you can. You also gain the ability to wear heavy armor, but why would you want to? And also use shields, but why would you want to as a rogue? So whether it's a good idea or not is totally up there. But it works. Now, the next thing, what was I going to say? So, I don't know if we're going to do that or not. But one thing that's very nice as a rogue that most rogues are going to want is 2-weapon fighting. And the reason is, if we look down here, the list of feats we already get for free as a rogue, we get something called sneak attack. Basically, whenever you hit someone who's not actively attacking you, okay? This is either someone who's unaware of you because you've been stealthed, or someone who's attacking someone else. So they're not actively engaged in combat with you directly, so maybe they're on your tank or something like that. On every attack, you get an extra 1d6 damage, an extra 1 to 6 damage. 1d6 means a single 6-sided die. So if you ever see 2d8, that means 2 8-sided dice. It's a Dungeon & Dragon thing. So rogues get to add a whole... 1d6 is amazing because as a rogue, let's say you're using a short sword does 1d6 damage. So you're literally doubling your damage simply by attacking someone who's unaware of you. That's the rogue-specific thing. And it improves as you level up. Every other level, your sneak attack improves by an extra die. So when you hit level 3, it's 2d6. Level 5 is 3d6, and so on and so forth, until you're doing 10d6 damage or something. Or maybe it's 9d6 damage. Or 11. Actually, I don't know. Whatever. You're doing a hell of a lot more damage if you're hitting someone who's not coming after you. So if you're soloing, that means you're really going to want two things. You're going to want a really good set of stealth skills, so you can sneak up to people and open up on them and just explode them in a single hit, basically. You may also want a really good bluff skill, because bluff allows you to sneak attack for the next 6 seconds. For group play, you may want a very good diplomacy skill, which will remove aggro from you, which means monsters are unlikely to attack you, which means they'll be attacking someone else, which means you can sneak attack the hell out of them. Very, very cool. Sneak attack also applies to every hit you do, which is why, as a rogue, going 2-weapon fighting is very nice, because if you're in a position where you're sneak attacking, you may as well sneak attack them twice as much. So 2-weapon fighting is awesome. It also looks really cool. I mean, who doesn't want to use a couple of daggers or a couple of short swords or something? Amazing! So that's really nice. You can also later on get weapon focus, which you don't have right now. You can spend a feat to unlock a martial weapon, for example, which could improve things quite a bit. But a lot of these martial weapons are actually not light, although some of these are. 2-weapon fighting, you want to use 2 light weapons. So you wouldn't want to use 2 long swords, you would want to use 2 short swords. They do slightly less damage, but wielding a heavy weapon is a penalty. Actually, it's only about what's in your offhand, I think. So you could use a long sword, assuming you were proficient, you could use a long sword in your main hand, and then a short sword or a dagger or a rapier or something in your offhand. What else are we going to take? There's a lot of really good stuff. If you want to do an archer rogue, then maybe point blank shot or rapid reload for your crossbow. A lot of different options. Crossbows tend to do more damage than bows, but they have a long reload time, so you want to take rapid reload if you're going to do a heavy crossbow build. Sap is really cool. If you're stealthed, you can sap someone and knock them out. You stun them for up to 30 seconds. Or it's 18 seconds in normal combat, 30 seconds if you do it from a sneak attack, if you were stealthed and then you do it. Damage will break sap, but it means at the start, I don't think it breaks your own stealth. I'm not sure. Maybe it does. But it means at the start of the fight, when you're stealthed, you could sap someone and take them out of combat for 30 seconds, and your group can just focus on everyone else, or even if you're soloing. So lots and lots of different skills. It's so hard to say what to take. Slicing Blow is an activated ability that will cause bleed damage. Snake Blood makes you resistant to poisons and improves your reflex saves. Stealthy just gives you a bonus to hide and move silently. That's not bad. Toughness. Toughness is great on everyone because it gives you more hit points, and we've already established hit points are good. It gives you, just by taking it, it gives you 3 extra hit points, and it gives you an extra hit points for each level you have. You can take this at any point, and I think it'll retroactively give you all your hit points. Now, note one thing interesting that happened. When we took, so now I have no feat, I've got 2-weapon fighting. I'm going to take 2-weapon fighting, and now there are 2 new skills down here. These require 2-weapon fighting as a prerequisite. So then you might be like, oh, well, how do I know what doesn't have a prerequisite? Well, you can click this checkbox to show unavailable. And this will show me things even that aren't available to me. They'll be in red. And you're like, oh, okay. So maybe later I want weapon focus for piercing. Because that'll be great when I'm using daggers or something. Then you can see the requirement, +1 base attack. You can also see weapon finesse. Oh, it needs +1 base attack and dex 13. 2-weapon fighting needs a dexterity of 15. But as I said, rangers get it for free, which means if you want to do a melee ranger, you could literally have no dexterity at all. Just take the feat for free and put all your points in strength or something. Really interesting. I'm going to hide the unavailable anyway. So 2-weapon blocking, when you block, when you're defending by holding on shift, you block better. And 2-weapon defense is just, you always have +1 to your AC when you have 2 weapons. Well, that's pretty good. And there's another one that's similar called dodge, which just gives you a +1 bonus to your AC. And it stacks with everything. And I believe the 2-weapon defense also just stacks with everything. It's an untyped bonus, which means even though we're not wearing heavy armor, we can actually be pretty well protected, especially early on. I'm going to take, I don't know, stealthy. Great. Awesome. So now we'll hit next. This just gives you a breakdown of everything about your character. And then we hit next. And here's where you can pick your character's look, which if you picked the path, you would have gone directly from I choose my race to this. All the stuff we just did, with starting from the attributes to the skills to the feats, is only if you don't pick your path. If you pick a path, it sets that all up for you, and they're actually pretty good. There's nothing wrong with that. So we can randomize our look a few times and get some pretty cool-looking characters. There you are. There's the character creation. And if you ever want to play tabletop Dungeons & Dragons, the process is extremely similar. So there you go. Valuable skills. Hope you enjoyed that. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.